what you've worked on in your time here.
Okay. My name is Leslie Midkiff-DeBauche, and I've taught at the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point for 27 years. And in that time, I've taught a whole bunch of different kinds of, mostly film classes. So I've taught Intro to Film, I've done French film and culture, Soviet film and culture, American film and culture of the 1930s, silent film. I've also done some department-required classes, an older one called Art of Criticism. I taught for quite a long time, and we looked at Batman movies, so I got to include film into that class as well. And I've taught writing classes also, screenwriting and other kinds of writing emphasis courses. What Stevens Point offered that I'm not sure I would have been able to find other places was the chance to really imagine things and then do them. And I guess what I mean by that is my very first year, I decided it would be really fun, I thought, to show a silent film with a live piano accompaniment. And I went to the dean and said that I would like to do this, and he gave me money. And so I was able to coordinate a woman in the theater department who trained the ushers to lead an audience sing-along, and people in the art department worked with students to make a poster, and I found a man in town, somebody in the music department actually aimed me towards this gentleman in town who accompanied silent films on piano, and Jim Lobb, for only the cost of moving the piano to Sentry, gave us a piano to use, and we filled Sentry and showed Wings, which was the first movie to win an Academy Award. And I remember when I told my old advisor at Madison that I was doing this and that the dean had given me money, his first question was, "You got to see the dean?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, how did you do that?" And I said, "Well, I called and made an appointment." And I guess I get the impression that maybe that wasn't so possible other places. But here it was. If you had an idea and were willing to sort of put the work in, people help you. And they help you both in terms of giving of their time and talent, but also administrators help financially too. So for me, because I guess maybe part of me is an event planner at heart, I love being able to not just devise curriculum for classes, but I like to think about other ways to teach what I love, and a lot of times that's via performances like film screenings or bringing speakers to campus who have knowledge that I want to learn and I think can benefit others too. So for me, that I think has been you know, the surprising and really wonderful part about it. I love the whole idea of COFAC Creates, because at its heart, COFAC Creates is about using what you're learning and making something out of it, and working with people in all of the other departments within the college to help do that. So one of the first COFAC Creates was COFAC Creates Silent Films. And the idea behind it was, I had a friend with a friend in Madison who had old cameras, 1920s newsreel cameras, and he taught a course in making silent films using his vintage cameras at Madison, and he was always complaining about how hard it was to find actors and how hard it was to build the sets and how hard it was to do the cinematography. And I said, well, you know, if you came to Point, we've got all these great students in all these different departments, so I can give you great set designers, and I've got costume people, and we've got actors, and we've got people who can do the art, and we've got, you know, the comm students who can create scenarios and shoot. And so we came up and we made a series of, I think, 4 or 5 films, sort of as they would have been made in 1905, using a hand-cranked camera and shot on film. And so that was one of the first COFAC Creates, and then we presented it live in the spring with a pianist, and then we also showed it at this really famous silent film festival in Italy the next year. So Stevens Point silent films were shown as part of 21st Century Silent Film Project on a whole other continent. It was really neat. And then I think I've done other COFAC Creates, but I was the Pirate movie was also a COFAC Creates. And there was the same thing. We had theater students and art students and comm students and music students. So we really did that in that one have students from every branch of the college. And they worked with Charlie Barnett, who just this year also let us use some of his music to make a zombie movie. But first he had this music called the Far Tortugas, which Professor Pat Miles had heard him talk about on the radio and describe as the soundtrack to the pirate movie he'd never gotten to make. And Pat loved that piece of music and thought, you know, maybe we could make him the pirate movie. And so he contacted me, again, another kind of great example of how this place really encourages you to work with people across disciplinary boundaries. And so the two of us decided maybe we could do this, and Jeff Moran, the dean, gave us money, and we found a woman who could help us with creating silhouettes. And then we did silhouette animation, which is, again, a really old form of cinematic animation. And everybody brought their skills to the table. So the music students in one of the first classes were kind of talking about the music and what needed to happen at certain minute marks and second marks within the score. And you could just see, you know, the comm students and the art students and the theater students thinking, oh my gosh, that's how it works. That's how a soundtrack works. And so we all learned from them. And then the theater students animated this wonderful tiny bit of film, but you could watch them using all their theater training to figure out, you know, how a pirate would raise his arm at a particular point in the movie, and the comm students had the editing expertise and you know, just a lot of production experience, and so everybody worked really well together for a really long time, and they worked really hard, which was also the case. Recent memory, and it was a moment during the filming of the Capstone movie, when and I think it typifies, or I think the memory, I think it comes to mind because I think it expresses partly what I've loved about teaching all these years, and it was a moment where I realized that the way that our director had created the shots for the film we were doing was exactly like what the textbook that we're using in my Intro to Film class describes as the current state of basically film editing. It's a new system, a newish system since about the 80s, called the intensified continuity system of editing films. And I had read about that, and I had taught it to my class, and you know, I had, you know, I guess intellectually understood what this intensified continuity system meant. But watching what Ian was doing and watching the way the cinematographers were moving the camera and imagining how this was going to look in editing, all of a sudden I thought, this is the intensified continuity system. And it was like my students were teaching me that. And I think what's been delightful, and I mean that word really literally, about teaching all these years, has been that every so often I'm talking about something that I feel like I really know and I've thought about, and then students will say something that makes me think about it differently or better. And so I've learned. So for me, the experience of teaching has always been the experience of learning, and I guess that's just the most recent manifestation of it. So I'm working on a book, I think, that's going to try and explain that dynamic among movies and these other sort of story-selling industries, as I think I'm going to call them now. But anyway, so I've been collecting research material for years, and I've got some chapters roughed out, and I'm really looking forward to being able to kind of settle down and focus on getting a book proposal finished and then the book written. So that's what I hope to do. And also maybe ride my bike more. High school, named Mrs. Thorne Thompson. She was an English teacher. And I remember as a freshman, I had her for 2 years, freshman year and sophomore year, and she was a really tiny, tiny woman with really short hair and just intense. And she would come into class, and she'd kind of perch on her chair. And I remember one day she came into class on a Monday, and she said, I spent the weekend in an insane asylum. And we, you know, she had our attention. We were all, and she had been to see this play called Marat Sade, and she had just really been blown away by it. And so the next weekend we talked Sally Goodbranson's mother into taking us down to Chicago to see Marat Sade. What Mrs. Thorne Thompson didn't tell us was that in the middle of Marat Sade, the main character gets out of his bathtub and he's naked. And so there was this row of like 8 of us, you know, 14-year-olds in the theater in Chicago with Mrs. Mrs. Goodbranson, you know, watching full frontal male nudity. And so we went into class on that next Monday and said, Mrs. Thorne Thompson, we saw Marat Sade too. And I think we bonded over that. But Mrs. Thorne Thompson's, the whole back of her classroom, the entire back wall was floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with books. And a couple of times a year she'd meet with all of us individually and talk about books and ask us what we liked and pick out a book from the bookcase and give it to us, and we'd go off and read. And I loved to read anyway, but she just really encouraged that and me. And so when I went off to college, I had decided I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be an English major and a writer. And so I went to the University of Iowa, which had quite a good writing program. But while I was there, I took a film class. And the man who taught that, Dudley Andrew, was still a graduate student himself. It was in the 70s, and there really were no film programs anywhere. And he was the most amazing teacher because he could pull from philosophy and from art and from literature and history, and use all of that to do these amazing interpretations of films. And I would just sort of sit in class, and I guess kind of mesmerized. And then, you know, he would show movies all weekend, and we would just go watch movies, and I loved it. And by the time I was graduating, you couldn't be a film major. And so at one point I went to him and I said, so I really like this, what should I do? And he said, well, you can't be a film major, just take as much film as you can and, you know, see what you do. So I became an English teacher and moved to Kansas City, and then sort of one thing led to another, and I decided I wanted to go back to graduate school and I wanted to study film. And so I wrote to him, and I said, I don't know if you're going to remember me, because 4 years had passed, but I love film, and I think I want to go back to school. And he wrote back and said he did remember me, and that I should apply, and I did, and got in. And then, and I went back to Iowa and did my master's degree, and then moved on to UW-Madison for my PhD, and there I had a professor named David Bordwell, who, again, was one of the most generous souls ever, and I think probably the smartest person I've ever met, and willing to help you understand whatever it was you wanted to understand, and with a sharp enough mind that he would ask questions, you know, that would push you farther. And so it was, so he also, I guess, is always kind of in the back of my mind as my role model. I would, if I could ever be like David Bordwell, that's what I would like to have been like. So.